Thank you very much, Ambassador Shotaro, for very comprehensive and detailed overview of Japan's external economic policy and the Japan FTA in particular. With this, the Ambassador's opening statement, I'm sure there are many questions and comments from the floor, and if you have any, and please raise your hand and make the point. Any question? Yes, this microphone, please.
Thank you, Klaus Auer, German Embassy. First of all, Ambassador, thank you very much for this really very interesting and informative talk. My question is, I think, a rather obvious one. You made many positive observations towards Korea-Japanese FTA, but why is it stuck? What are the stumbling points, and how can it be resolved? Thank you.
Well, the reason I didn't go into that part was because that's a very difficult and sensitive part of the whole feature. Very frankly, between friends, I had a paragraph on that particular question, so I had an answer. But I deleted that paragraph last night. I think it was too sensitive. So I have an answer, but I have deleted it from my memory, so I cannot give it to you. But more seriously, I'm sure you know the official formal meetings. About a year and a half ago, two negotiating teams met and sort of exchanged some information as to where each side stood. And the Korean side said our offer on the agriculture was too low. Of course, we have a totally different perspective. We think we had a sufficient level of ambition, level of concessions. So we are always ready if the Koreans are ready to come back to the table. Having had experience in trade negotiations for some years, for the past decade or so, and particularly having had the experience of working very closely with the Korean counterparts, my very close friends, in the WTO context. And we all know how agriculture is very sensitive and difficult. So my sense was that my good old friend counterpart negotiators would be able to understand where we stand on agriculture and why we are doing this. And that when we sit down, we're willing to negotiate even on agriculture. I didn't go into the experience with Mexico when we negotiated FTA, but at the very end it became the most difficult part of our negotiations with agriculture. It went up to the ministers sat down across the table a number of times until they finally came to a compromise. So what I'm trying to say is that we are ready to negotiate even agriculture. If it takes to concede on some very important points, we will do so. But of course it's negotiations, you have to sit down and we have to balance out the concessions. So unless you sit down and negotiate, we cannot do it. I think it's a matter of negotiating style, in my view, where wine got stuck and not of substance.
I'm a local journalist. I pose this question. I'd like to ask this question. Why the negotiation between Korea and Japan on FTA stops? What are the differences, and why should the negotiation begin again? What are the benefits both countries can get from restarting the FTA?
Yeah, as I said, basic difficulty we are facing on surface is in the area of agriculture. But as I said, it's not necessarily that particular area that's the negotiating style, because we have always, Japan has always negotiated agriculture in the context of FTAs, or more importantly, in the context of WTO. So when we are asked to concede in the area of agriculture up front, it becomes difficult. But once we sit down across the table and specifics are negotiated, I think we'll be able to negotiate. So those are the sticking points. What are the benefits? I think it's very obvious. Two economies so close, so intertwined. If we do negotiate and liberalize further in the remaining areas, the two stand to benefit. And as I try to picture the whole relationship in a global context, much going beyond regional context as well, we have much more to gain than otherwise if we pursue the free trade agreement.
Yes. Yes.
Ambassador Oshima, my name is JWD. I appreciate very much for your wonderful speech. I think this is the first time that Japanese VIP talk about the Japanese Korean FTA. I, as an NGO level, participated in the tri-country, that is Japan and Korea FTA meeting, first in 5 years ago in Hawaii, then Anchorage, and Osaka Convention, and Niigata. This related to the former questioners. Did ever that G2G, government level, Japan and Korea FTA preliminary or preliminary tapping talk each other has been made before February 2006, and on after there's any kind of G2G, not only the foreign ministry but of the Sangyo, Susansho, other ministry is going to have a preliminary talk, Japan and Korea FTA.
Let me invite Mr. Yan also, and Dr. Yan from.
Okay, my name is Oshima. I'm working for the Trade Research Institute. First of all, let me congratulate on your very insightful presentation. My question is about the sequencing and phasing of FTAs in Japan. As you know, there are almost 200 regional trade agreements reported to WTO, and then more than 50% of trade are being made under the FTA in the world. So Korea pursued a very simultaneous approach on FTAs. As you know, that Korean government are being negotiated in more than almost 10 countries. Okay. So how is Japan? I mean, Japan has some kind of policy that is sequencing or phasing of FTAs, or similar to Korea's simultaneously. What do evaluation sequencing and simultaneous approach? And in extension to this question, I'd like to discuss. Suppose that once that Korea made successfully FTA with the United States, they might provide some kind of stimulus for Japan to negotiate FTA with Korea or the other countries. Okay. Second part is that during the process of FTAs, it's very important to get the public support for the FTAs. What is the Japanese government role in getting the public support in pursuing FTAs? As far as my remembrance is correct, I read in the newspaper that Japan's Prime Minister announced in the cabinet that he will become Minister of FTAs. So please make some comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Oshima, for your very exhaustive overview of your ministry's position on your diplomacy, economic diplomacy. I have two very specific short questions, plus a bit longer statements of somewhat provocative nature to you. The two questions. First, what you mentioned the visit of your deputy foreign minister to his counterpart in the Korean government, and you said that he was not very strongly received or enthusiastically received. So I'm not going to ask you about the Korean government's reaction, but what is the purpose of your deputy minister's visit to the Korean government? Secondly, you have negotiated and validated the FTA with Mexico. Can you give us a few aspects of the agricultural component of the Japan-Mexico FTA on issues which you think might interest us? And here is my statement, which is really an assessment of the economic diplomacy of the Japanese government, which you so much emphasized. And my point is that your economic diplomacy of your government and your ministry has not been very effective for quite some time. Let's look at the trade policy front. At the WTO, you've been one of the foot drivers, as it were, as has been Korean government. And in the regional context of the APEC, you've been, again, have been at the forefront of promoting the so-called BOGO goals, and then at the level of bilateral relationship, for example, take the case of your FTA with the Korean negotiations, it has been stopped. And there is one common element, one major obstacle, which operates at all these levels, which is your agriculture. So I would say that agriculture is one of your major obstacles to your more active and effective economic diplomacy. And let's look at the case of financial policy and diplomacy, and let's look at the IMF at the global level. You've been all along playing a second fiddle to the United States. You have not been an effective player and participant in the process. Let's look at the East Asian financial cooperation, ASEAN +3 discussions of Chiang Mai Initiative and so on. That process has come to sort of a impasse because of your inability to negotiate on the issue of surveillance and so on. Here we know what is really the problem which underlies those stalemates, which is your basic rivalry with China, and then at a more general level, the problem of history. There's disagreements between Japan and other East Asian countries, including China and Korea, on history. You said that Korea and Japan shares many things. I think we do share everything except history. And in the eyes of the world, I think the world community is more sympathetic to China and Korea than to Japan on this issue of history. And of course, you've been very active and effective at the level of development assistance policy. And I think you've been making a very big, huge contributions to the economic development, especially in Southeast Asia. But more lately, you have begun to be overtaken by China. And you are now in a situation where you have to keep running in order to stay at where you are, instead of getting behind China. So you are there losing your leverage here again. So here, my summation is that, first of all, you have to basically deal with two big obstacles or enemies to yourself. One is your agriculture, and one is and history. And I wonder if you have any roadmap for dealing with your agricultural problem. And if you do, and if you would embark on that road, that would encourage Korea to follow the suit. And as to history, I wonder if the political community leaderships in Japan can come up with some kind of a long-term roadmap for dealing with this. So this is my observation. Thank you.
I think you have enough to read. So.
Thank you very much for those very frank and straightforward questions. There were a few questions preceding that, so I'll try to respond to them all. I don't know if I can manage to remember all of them or put them in a very coordinated, organized way, but let me try to respond to specific questions and then come to the more philosophical side. One, with respect to the sequencing of FTAs, I think I tried to make myself clear about where we stand. We have already negotiated and agreed with a number of Southeast Asian countries. So immediate focus is Southeast Asia. Mexico is, in a sense, anomaly in that focus on our part on Asia, but I'll come to that in the context of the question that was just posed. We are, of course, looking into the possibility of FTA within India too, so it's not only East Asia, it's broadened. With respect to Southeast Asia, we have a two-layered approach of one pursuing FTAs with individual countries as well as ASEAN as a whole. So we are negotiating mode on these questions. As to the fact that we would be redoubling our efforts, having the Prime Minister himself at the head of this government's effort, that's where we are. With respect to public support, well, it's the usual trade negotiations. We would, of course, need to consult with all the industry representatives throughout the negotiations. But once we go through this, and the government decides on policy and finds a conclusion, we hope that that will be supported by people as well. Coming to some of the specific questions from Ambassador Young, the Deputy Foreign Minister's visit objective was to open up a dialogue or resume a dialogue between the two governments on a broad spectrum of issues outside of the FTA negotiations, because, as I said in my speech, much focus has been devoted to FTA itself, and when it stopped or it got stuck, the dialogue itself on other issues and stuff. So we wanted to have this resumption. And as I said, the response was positive, but we were hoping for even more stronger response on these areas, because our sense is that even if we have difficulty over the FTA, why should that impinge on other areas? With respect to Mexico, if I may go into a little bit of detail, although I was not directly involved, so it's only second-hand knowledge. Initially, as I said, our business people were very much concerned that because of the fact that Mexico had managed to have NAFTA and then FTA with the European Union, our industrial goods were being sort of squeezed out from the Mexican market. That's the simplistic way of formulating why there was a pressure. So we finally went down to negotiating, and when it came down, although there were some industrial areas which had difficulty, like automobiles, to their market, from their side, the greatest difficulty evolved around two agricultural products, if I remember correctly. One is pork, and the other was orange juice. Now, two great economies fighting over pork and orange juice doesn't sound too great, but that's the way trade negotiations are. And when it comes to agriculture, you really fight to the very end kind of negotiations. So the ministers got together a number of times, and of course in the process many negotiations broke down, but finally there was a compromise agreement. So we opened up for Mexican exports of pork and orange juice under certain formula. That's why I always cite Mexico that once we sit down and negotiate, and if we are given specific guidance for negotiations, we are willing to concede even on agriculture. So, if you really want to have a result in the negotiations, you better sit down, otherwise you never get the fruit of the negotiations. Now, much broader question of almost, I say, philosophical nature on agriculture. No, of course, I'm very much aware that agriculture is a difficult area for our trade negotiations, and in the WTO, it's posing a great difficulty. But well, I didn't say this, but when we got stuck on the FTA with Korea, what I used to say, and I'm still saying, is that since we are in Japan negotiating agriculture in the context of WTO, it's very difficult for us to ask or demand it to come up forward with across-the-board concessions on agriculture. We would have to first deal with WTO, which is much bigger negotiations and involves much broader aspects affecting all sorts of industries, not just agriculture. So when we deal with WTO, then we will be in a better position to deal with agriculture in the FTA context. But as I said, that does not mean once we sit down we can negotiate. We will not. That doesn't contradict with my proposition that once we sit down we can negotiate specific items of agriculture. It is the way the demand is put forward to us that we should put forward up front significant concessions. And that's really difficult for us when we are in the midst of a WTO negotiation. Now, in the area of agriculture, it is difficult for us. It's because it's not just an economic industrial issue, but it's a political issue. And of course, people only add to that, saying it's a cultural issue. But of course, between us, trade negotiators, I might use it in trade negotiating context, but it's obviously a political issue. And that's the reality of the whole situation. I mean, it would be nice if the Japanese government could say, well, we are going to concede on agriculture, I'm sorry you guys in agriculture, I'm sorry you farmers, we have to concede. It would be nice if you could say that, but each economy, when negotiating trade, does have to face the realities prevailing in each of the economies. It's not only Japan, the EU has a serious issue with agriculture. Although Japan might be foot dragging, if you use that expression, on agriculture, is Japan the only advanced economy which is dragging its foot on the negotiations on agriculture? No, because agriculture is always difficult. Any of the economies, be it developed or not. But to be honest, although it's a negotiating, for negotiators on the other side to say, we are foot dragging on agriculture because it strengthens its position, I don't think Japan has the monopoly on this foot dragging on agriculture in the whole of the WTO or other negotiations. With respect to history, let me mention APEC since you talked about all those. Now, you provoke me. When I was responsible for APEC, I was put in a very difficult position because many other members of APEC tried to use APEC to negotiate and open up certain areas of Japanese industry. And I had to exist. So I could go in telling you stories about how difficult it was. But we believe that APEC is basically a forum where members' economies voluntarily try to liberalize trade in other areas. So when some members try to use it as a negotiating forum instead of a voluntary forum, it soured the atmosphere, particularly on the part of the Japanese side. So I think it needs to be reinstilled with the basic formulation on which it was conceived. Now on history, that's a very difficult question. Well, I've been saying in this kind of forums, when we speak about Japanese foreign policy, or particularly the relationship between the two countries, I always ask the audience to look at the history of Japan after the war, particularly with the establishment of the Constitution in 1947, which has certain principles like pacifism, international cooperation, and all the principles of democracy, public sovereignty, human rights, all these things. And I say that despite what some people might see, and there are of course people who are limited, but there are certain people in Japan who sometimes say things and do things which can give rise to concern, but you please look at where Japan is in terms of the political system. And please don't exaggerate the implications of certain expressions and actions as to, interpret them as reflecting the whole of the society. The Japanese society is democratic and much more commonsensical and balanced. So I think it's a difficult process, but I'm very optimistic that in the days ahead, if not years ahead, we'll have a better mutual understanding. And of course, we on our side do a lot of soul searching, even after 60 years after the war. But still, will we be able to do that?
Let me, yes, you have, yeah.
I ask for once again to apologize to Ambassador Oshima for having raised the question on history. But my point is that we may want to pretend that that problem doesn't exist, but it won't go away. And so long as it doesn't go away, we won't make much headway in terms of promoting economic cooperation, integration in particular in East Asia.
Actually, I'm quite sympathetic with the ambassador's position because he is ambassador representing the Japanese government. But in my view, I would, in that context, I want to pose the question this way. On surface, agriculture and tariff-related issues are bottlenecks for Japan-Korean FTA negotiation. However, the real issue, in my view, lies in somewhere else. Agriculture and tariff-related issues are difficult issues, complicated issues, and technical issues are there. But I think the real issue lies in political arena. So in that context, you as a career very leading, the Japanese leading economic diplomat, aren't you frustrated by both countries, I'm not just saying the Japanese side, both countries' political leadership, which help create unfavorable political atmosphere in which the economic diplomat have to work with. Now that includes all the other political issues we have today, including history and many other issues. I think, in my view, with all your effort, I mean you as an economic diplomat, I don't think this issue can be easily settled. So if we really get down to the substance of the problem, I think this issue is a political issue, which is rather emotional. And I personally think that both countries' politicians try to take advantage of this domestic political and the people's emotions for their political, domestic political advantage. And unless this issue is, the situation is changed, I don't think the two countries, the economic diplomats sit together and solve the issue. Don't you agree with me? I'm very sympathetic with you.
Thank you, Dr. Saganil, for rephrasing the question, in which you used the word, or you asked me whether I'm not frustrated, and you described further to say frustrated at what. I'm a bit concerned about the what part you mentioned, and of course I won't repeat this because it becomes a little bit ago. If the question was simply, am I frustrated, the answer would be very simple. Yes, I'm frustrated. But because of the way you put it, whether I'm frustrated at something, I'm not repeating what you said. I won't say I'm frustrated for obvious reasons. No, the reason I made a long speech about economic diplomacy without talking about history, I have some reasons for doing that in this, despite the fact that this was in Korea, this was in Seoul, this was with Korean friends. There was one phrase I sort of slipped in somewhere online, which I'm sure you nobody noticed. This was not in context of Japan and Korea, in the context of a broader regional reference. I used the word separation of politics and economics. That was a concept which drove the relationship between Japan and China and other countries. I'm sure when China was still before reforms and policies, still very hardline communist. Of course, the nature of the relationship is totally different. We have shared values. The only thing we are separated by the memories of a very tragic and sad history, and in which we were the aggressors and victimizers, and you were the victims. So, no matter what happens, this relationship will never change. That's for sure. And we are very much aware of that. And we will do as much as possible, to the extent possible, on our side as well. So, what I would very much like to say is that, I'm sorry to use this cliche, but it takes two to tango. Let me cite a little. I'm sure I know that from your perspective, from the Korean perspective, I'm trying to excuse Japan, but still, let me use this little anecdote written by a famous novelist called Ryunosuke Akutagawa. I don't remember the exact wording, but it goes something like this. I know the Japanese words, but I'm trying to translate this into English. This master tells on, criticizes the disciples, saying that even when I make music, you don't dance. And the disciples presented the which who said, no, master, we are dancing very hard, but you are not satisfied. Thank you.
Okay, I saw two fingers. You have questions? Okay, and then Mr. Lee. Okay, just two. She has two fingers first. Yes.
Thank you. A brief question. Yeah, you mentioned that when you were dealing with APEC matters, many other member states wanted to use APEC to open up for your economy. And I was thinking, isn't that exactly what open regionalism is all about? To use regional formats for promoting multilateralism and opening up markets? Thank you.
Okay, yes, one more, just last, yes.
I think previous questioners had other questions, which was very good. So I will make only two simple questions. Japan being the largest market economy in Asia, don't you think it appropriate idea that she should initiate establishing East Asia Pacific Political and Economic Cooperation Organization to cope or versus member countries of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which held summit meeting very recently. But my last question is, don't you think it advantageous and advisable that Korea-Japan FTA should be proceeded and concluded before Korea-US FTA, considering Korea being trade deficit country with Japan for benefit to both of our countries? Nice to see you again.
Thank you. The first question, I didn't specifically go into the issue. Of course, APEC is for liberalizing trade, but I was criticizing the position taken by a certain number of members who went beyond what we consider to be the basic principles of APEC, which is basically voluntary, where governments are supposed to voluntarily open up trade or investment areas. There are so many different jargons like TILF and whatever it was, TILF was what. There's formulations and peer pressure was another one method used. But what I was criticizing was the high-handed negotiating tactics used by certain governments who shall not be named, but I can always name it for you if you want. But anyway, with this question of the political economic organization building, I did not go into the institutional side of East Asia community building on purpose. I don't think time is yet right for that kind of institutional building. As I said, our position is to try to go by functional cooperation. We find an area where we can cooperate among a certain number of countries. It doesn't have to be all regionally encompassing or a certain number of specific members. We should be very flexible in trying to build up layers of specific area, functional population. With respect to the sequencing of FTA negotiations, FTA agreements with US and Japan, basically it's for Korea to decide. It's not for us to ask you to put Japan before US or anything like that. But I think there's no, what should I say, what's the word I want, I hope the fact that you are pursuing negotiations with the Americans will not hinder the process of negotiations with Japan. Once one makes the political decision, as people have been discussing, it's basically a political difficulty. But once that is, if that is overcome, I hope the fact that you are engaged in negotiations with Americans will not be an hindrance. Of course, in terms of human resources, it might be, but it will not be a policy decision. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I suppose we can go on like this all morning, but we have to free Ambassador. I really appreciate very much for you taking time to come to this forum, and it is very fortunate for us to have you. And I personally, I was in the government as well previously, and when you have occasion like this, you are sometimes constrained by many things, but I'm sure the ambassador this morning, although he is ambassador, he shared his personal views as well. So maybe if you catch him somewhere else in private occasion, he may still maintain his position, or he may give you different answers. But in any case, we appreciate very much. And I just want to conclude by saying that we talk about East Asian community building, but what is lacking is that seriously lacking is the sense of community in Northeast Asia. Unless we have community building, but what is lacking is that seriously lacking is the sense of community in Northeast Asia. Unless we have